Welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by Tutvid.com. Today we're going to look at creating this relatively simple Twitter piece of user interface, sort of like a tweet UI, if you will. It's just fairly simple. It uses the shape tools in Photoshop and a few other little blend modes and things. But we're going to create this entire thing from scratch, including the little Twitter button. So how do we do this? Well, let's take a look and jump in. So we're going to go File, New to create a new document, and I'm going to name this Twitter UI rect, just so I know that this is the version I recorded. Width of 1280 pixels, height of 720 pixels, and hit OK. Now, well, it's always nicer to work over kind of a cool textured background than just, this harsh white. It just, until you kind of put your user interface into some kind of context, and that is, the rest of the user interface, or onto a web app or mobile app of some sort, it always kind of looks very sparse if you just drop it in over a regular background. So a lot of really great creative pros do this thing where they create custom backgrounds, so I like to do that. So you can jump over to a site like lostandtaken.com and grab some sort of a textured background. I actually have one that I like, and I can't even remember where I found it on the site. It's been a little while, but I'm going to drag it into my Photoshop document and let go. And then I'm going to rotate it and just resize it so it kind of covers the whole thing, right about like so. Enter return to commit the changes. There we go. We've got a cool textured background. I could leave the color, but I don't know that I really like the color. So I'm going to right click and say, hey, rasterize the layer. And then I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, Channel Mixer, and just choose monochrome. So it's going to convert it to black and white. Hit OK. And there we go. So just like that, we've added some nice textured background stuffs. And the next step is going to be to create our rounded rectangle. Now, the color of the rounded rectangle doesn't matter because we're going to be either covering it with sort of layer styles or other content. So let's grab the rounded rectangle tool, which is located over here beneath the rectangle tool. Rounded rectangle tool. Now, depending on your version of Photoshop, you're going to see slightly different options as far as the rounded rectangle tool is concerned. The one thing here, I've already figured out the size and everything, so you'll be able to just punch it in and follow right along. You won't need to worry about editable anything. We do, however, want to make sure that we're creating a new shape layer. Our fill can be any color. We don't want any stroke, right? So we just cancel out a stroke. And we want a radius of 3 pixels, but we're going to set that here in a second. So I'm just going to click anywhere on my document, and a rounded rectangle of 100 by 100 with a radius, not of 3 pixels, of 5 pixels on the corners. I'm just looking at what I had last in there. Go ahead and hit OK. And we can see we have created our nice rounded, not rectangle, but square. It is within this square that we're going to place our avatar image. So I'm going to drag that in. I've got a picture of myself here, which is sort of like my photography image, at least for my photography Twitter page currently. And I'm going to size this down, holding down my Shift and Alt keys. I'm going to size it down until it's a little bit larger than our rounded rectangle. And I'm going to place it right over the rounded rectangle. Hit the check icon. Now you can see over here in the Layers panel, we have the avatar layer, and we also have rounded rectangle. We want to create what's called a clipping mask. We can do that by holding down our Alt or Option key and hovering over the border between the two layers. You can see that little icon that appears. It says like, hey, little, arrow pointing down. That means clip. So our top layer is only going to show wherever the bottom layer is. So you can see we've got these nice rounded corners now. I'm going to grab the avatar layer, make sure that I have my move tool selected, and just adjust to make sure it's kind of the way I want it. I can even hit Command or Control T and size it down a little bit more if I need to. And I think I like that there. So the next thing that we want to go ahead and do is duplicate our rounded rectangle and create sort of the base to start beginning to build, this 3D look beneath our avatar. So select the rounded rectangle layer, hold down your Alt or Option key, and drag this layer straight down. Now, typically when I duplicate a layer, I just select it and hit Command or Control J, but I don't want to be worried about, any clipping mask being busted up. You can see it's not going to do anything, but it's just more of a force of habit thing for me. I'm going to select the lower rounded rectangle, grab the Move tool, hold down my Shift key, and hit the down arrow key. All right, so we just nudge that down 10 pixels, straight down, just like that. That looks great. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and apply a gradient to this sort of base. So I'm going to go Layer, Layer Style, Gradient Overlay. and the gradient is going to be at an angle of 90 degrees. That's really the only important thing you need to make sure is set here. You can see it doesn't look like anything has changed. Don't worry, that's just because, remember, we have a rounded rectangle that's going all the way up to about here. So all the lighter stuff is up here, but obviously that's behind this picture or the avatar image. We want to select the gradient, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the white point over here to about 25% on the location. Hey, look at that. We can start to see some gradation happening from this lighter gray to our black color. What I'm going to do is I'm going to double click to open up this color stop, and I'm going to select one of the middle tones in the image, so something like the background color. All right, hit OK. And then I'm going to select the black stop, and I'm going to select about that same color. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a little bit darker. So I'm going to go to brightness, and I'm just going to hit the down arrow key, a bunch of times. Maybe take it down like 20, hit OK, and we can see we've got this nice gradation. I think I want it to be a little bit darker even, so I'm just going to knock it down a little bit more. There we go, something maybe right about like that. It's just whatever, adjust it to taste. And you can see it's just a little bit lighter at the top and a little bit darker at the base. That's going to play into how we're going to sort of style this later when we add a little bit of a shine to the top and also add a shadow at the base of our shape here to really make this look like it's 3D. So you can go ahead and hit OK to commit this change. And we're going to go ahead and add that sort of surface dimension that I just mentioned a moment ago by adding some shine and a little bit of like this glistening edge to the top of our little box here. So hold down your Alt or Option key. We want to select this rounded rectangle. The only reason is this rounded rectangle doesn't have a bunch of layer styles on it now, or any layer styles for that matter. So hold down the Alt or Option key and drag it up above the avatar image layer. Okay, so we've got this black rounded rectangle covering up our image. Don't worry about that. We can go ahead and select the fill and set that to 0. The reason I did this is because this rounded rectangle here is simply going to be a container or a vehicle for a bunch of layer styles that we're going to apply. And fill opacity reduces the opacity of the pixels, but not of any layer styles that you've applied to that layer. So we don't need to worry about this black color getting in the way of what we've got going on. We can now just apply the different layer styles that we want to our avatar and create some cool effects. So I'm going to start by going layer style, there we go, bevel and emboss. And here in the bevel and emboss, we're going to do a couple things. I'm going to set the depth to 500. That's going to sort of increase the contrast that we've got going on. I'm going to set the direction to up and the size to 1 pixel. So it's going to be a very subtle little bevel and emboss on the edge. Inner bevel and smooth, by the way, work just fine. I can just leave this set to global light. 120 degrees by 30 degrees is fine. The gloss contour is fine. The highlight mode screen perfect, color of white perfect. We're going to set the opacity to 50%. And then for the shadow, we're going to set the opacity to 0. So we just have this nice little highlight going across the top and a little bit of a highlight down the left side of our avatar image. Don't worry. Don't freak out yet. We're not quite done. Next, we're going to go to inner shadow. So with the inner shadow, we're going to set this to a blend mode of normal. And you can see we've got a little bit of darkness happening all of a sudden. We're going to set the color, however, to white, because this is going to be another sort of, we want this to look like a sheet of glass going across the top of this, brownish, tannish base. So blend mode of normal, color white. The opacity, let's leave it at 75 right now. We're going to deselect use global light and set the angle to -90. So it's going to move that sort of gloss down to the bottom. All right. Now you can see how our gradient being a little bit lighter at the top is going to play a little bit with this edge, which is going to be catching, some imaginary light, if you will. Then we're going to set the distance to 1 and the size to 0. So we just want one very hard-edged highlight. Now that highlight's a little bit too strong, so I'm just going to reduce the opacity right down to around 40, 45%, something like that looks great. And then the next thing to do is a gradient overlay. Now you might be thinking, what in the world are you talking about? But hang with me here. We're going to create a gradient which is going to be a gloss. So here's how we do this. We're going to open up the gradient strip, and we're going to set this black handle to white. All right, so it's just full solid white. Well, we're also going to select this handle at the top and set the opacity to 0. So we go sort of solid white to nothing. Well, that's all fine and dandy. What we want to do, however, is create 2 top points, both at about 50%. So I just created a top stop, and then I'm going to create another top stop here at 50%. And this second top stop, right, out here, I'm going to boost the opacity to 100. So we're trying to get a very sharp line. So I'm just going to move it as close as I can to the other color stop, or the other opacity stop really, which you can see this opacity stop has an opacity of 0, this one opacity of 100. So if we get them right beside each other, we're going to have this nice, sharp, straight line. Hit OK, and we've created our gloss gradient, and we need to adjust it a little bit now. We can leave the blend mode as normal. I want to kind of set it on an angle, so let's just rotate it a little bit, something like that. 130, we can actually just round it off at 130 degrees, that's fine. Scale of 100 is perfect. Linear, perfect. All we need to do is reduce the opacity, so let's knock it down to something fairly subtle, right around 30% or so, and that looks great. We can, at this point, go ahead and hit OK to commit those changes, and I'm just going to back it out to 100%. So you can see we've got sort of this glossy looking top layer to our sort of 3D box. The next step to adding a little bit more dimension is to add a shadow below this. So what we want to do is, I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit, right here above the subtle texture layer, but beneath all of our rounded rectangles, we're going to add a layer. And I'm going to call this avatar hyphen shadow. All right, there we go. And I'm going to grab the elliptical marquee tool right there, and I'm going to draw out a nice thin oval right about that size, and I'm going to fill it with black. So we can go edit, fill, and then just choose black. Hit OK. And then go select, deselect, note the hotkey Command or Control D to get rid of that selection. Great. Now that we've done that, you can see it doesn't quite look like a shadow, but we're heading in the right direction. So we can go filter, Gaussian blur, well, filter blur, Gaussian blur, and choose something like 8 or 9 pixels. I actually like 9. Let me see what 8 looks like. 8 is actually great. So we're going to go with 8 pixels. That's going to be something where it's all going to depend. Probably every time you do this, it's going to be a little bit different. And then we can even just hit Command or Control T to bring up the free transform and just resize the shadow a little bit just to make it perfect. You know, we can even adjust it or move it around a little bit, wherever it needs to be moved to really make it look the most realistic, like it's really kind of perched there on its edge. All right, and I kind of like that. We can even reduce the opacity a little bit if need be. Just, well, I don't know if I want to reduce it much at all. There we go, something just like that looks cool. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and create the actual rounded rectangle, which is going to contain our text, or our tweet in this case, because we know that this is a user interface element for some kind of Twitter something. All right, so I'm going to go up here to the top of my layers panel, and I'm going to grab the rounded rectangle tool, and I'm going to set the fill to white, all right? And we can ignore everything else. We're going to adjust all that when we click here, okay? So we're going to set the width to 425 pixels. And the height to, let's go with like 175, and a corner radius here, let's try 3 pixels. Actually, you know what? I'm going to go with 5 again, just so we kind of stay with what our avatar is, and hit OK. And there we go. You can see we've got this nice rounded white area ready to receive some text. I'm going to roughly align it with the top of my little avatar there. All right. I've got snapping turned on, so it's going to sort of help me out a little bit. And now that we've done that, we need to create the little arrow. So we're going to have a little kind of arrow coming out of the edge of our tweet holder, kind of saying like, hey, this guy just said this, you know, stupid little bit of information, as it usually is with me. So I'm going to make sure I have my rounded rectangle layer selected. Now, I believe if you're using anything older than CS6, you aren't going to be able to do this way that I'm about to show you. What you're going to have to do is like grab your rectangle tool. You've got it set to draw a new shape layer. You're going to draw out a little square, right? And you're going to have to sort of manually merge these layers together. I'll explain it more depth in just a second. So those of you who are hanging with me using CS6 or newer, grab the rounded rectangle layer, and from this little drop down, choose Combine Shapes. And then hold down your Shift key and draw out a nice little square. You can see that we didn't have a new shape layer up here, even though we're drawing a new shape. So you think, hey, like there should be a new shape layer, right? Well, not really, because this is now just part of this shape layer. 2 separate paths, but part of this shape layer. So now we're going to grab the Path Selection tool and select this little element and go Edit, Free Transform Path. And then here in the Rotate input box, I'm just going to enter 45 degrees for the angle. Check to commit that change, and then I'm just going to bring this right up and place it so it's kind of pointing into the middle of the avatar, just like that. All right, so you can do all of that just like that with anything older than CS6, except you're probably going to have created a new shape layer. So at this point, what you want to do is just select both of those shape layers and then hit Command or Control E to merge them together. Here in CS6, we can just grab both of these live shapes and go Merge Shape Components. just like that, and make them into one shape so it's still vector. Now, there is a way to do this in versions of Photoshop older than CS6, but you have to get involved in the paths panel and the direct selection tools, and just trying to explain it without showing you would be a little bit, it would just be difficult. So if you know how to do it, feel free to go ahead and do that and keep following along. So the point is, we have a shape here that is just sort of this rounded rectangular box with a nice little arrow coming out of it. So the next step is going to be going ahead and applying an outer glow to this, as well as a stroke. We'll probably throw a stroke on it as well. So let's go Layer, Layer Style, Outer Glow. There we go. And I'm going to set the blend mode to normal. We're going to set the color to black. We're going to set, we'll leave the opacity at 75 for now. Let's set the size. Let's boost that up to like 5. And we definitely need to down the opacity. Let's knock it down to around 20, 25. 25 is not bad. Let's go a little lower. 20. I like 20. Let's roll with 20. And we're also going to apply a stroke. So we're going to go stroke. And the stroke is almost going to be default. But let's just set the size to 1. And the color can remain black. And the opacity, we're just going to reduce that to about 25. And maybe set the position to inside, see what that looks like. I don't like that. Let's set it back to outside. There we go, just like that. Hit OK to commit those changes. So at this point, we've kind of created the shapes that we want, right? If I back out to 100%, it's looking pretty good. Looks pretty smooth. Maybe I would adjust the color of this base a little bit more and adjust the shine a little bit more. You know, just little things here and there to clean it up. But at this point, I want to add the little Twitter bird logo to the bottom right corner so people can quickly identify, hey, that's something from Twitter. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to run a Google search for Twitter logo. If I can spell Twitter correctly. There we go, Twitter logo, and go to images. And this first image here is perfect, right from Twitter. We can right click on it and say, hey, copy image. Go back to Photoshop, Command or Control V to paste the image. You can see we're behind all of our stuff, so I'm going to drag it up here to the front. I'm actually going to save this original blue version, but I'm going to get rid of the white around it. So I'm going to grab the magic wand tool, and I'm going to just click. All right, so we just selected all that stuff around the blue bird, hit the delete key, and there we go. We've just got our nice little blue bird. I'm going to save this copy of the blue bird. So I'm going to shut that layer off, and I'm going to hit Command or Control J. We've duplicated the layer. Great. Now that we've got this on a new layer, we're going to hit Command or Control U, or we can go Image Adjustments, Hue Saturation. And we're just going to set the brightness all the way down to give us a solid black bird. Perfect. Now what we need to do is just size this down, drop it in the corner, and reduce the opacity. So let's edit, free transform. Hold down your Shift and Alt keys to really size that bird down. Bring him down to the corner. Maybe I'll make him a little bit smaller. Something like that. And just kind of position it the way you want it in the corner. And then reduce the opacity until it's very subtle. Something like 15% looks just great. The next step is going to be adding the actual text for the tweet. At this point, it would really just be, you know, it is really just for mock-up purposes, just so people know what's going on. So go ahead. I can name this layer, actually. Let's name it Twitter logo. I'm going to grab the text tool, and I'm going to drag out a field of type, something like that, and tweet goes here. And I kind of like it. I want to get some real text, though, for it. So what I'm going to do, well, let me just jump over here to this document, and I have this text here, this quote from Steve Jobs with a bogus TwitPic link. So I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to come over here and paste it in, and there we go. So I'm going to commit those changes, and I think actually it's just a little bit too big, so I'm going to select the type. I'm going to move the box away from the edges a little bit more, so we have a little bit more of a margin, and just shift that over, shift it down a little bit. There we go, something like that. I'm just using a, kind of a cheap Helvetica font for PC, regular weight of the font, 14 points. And the color, well, for the gray is, let's see, 404040. And the blue that I used for the TwitPic link is 467DD0. So that's the type, that's the text. And there we go. So we've created that. Now the last thing that we need to create for our little bit of UI here is that little Twitter button, which is going to go right down here that basically says like, hey, follow me on Twitter, or something like that. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create that. So it starts with, again, the rounded rectangle tool. So we'll grab the rounded rectangle tool right there and just click once. and I already know the sizes I want. I kind of pre-sized it out. It's 105 pixels wide by 20 pixels tall with a corner radius of 3 pixels. Hit OK, and that's going to drop a nice little rounded rectangle in for us. Now, the beauty of these vector rounded rectangles is even if you have a much longer Twitter username, you can just grab this guy, and with the path selection tool here, and well, if you grab this guy, right, and move him off here, and just select the anchor points on the end, you can just use your, whoops, wrong arrow. You need the direct path selection tool. There we go. Highlight the anchor points on that side of the button, and then just, begin nudging them over. All right, so I'm just going to undo that. Matter of fact, I'm going to take a couple steps back, and we can just pretend like that never happened. So the point is here, with this rounded rectangle, we need to just go ahead and make this look like a real Twitter button. Now, we could go online and just, screenshot one off someone else's site, but there's no fun in that. So let's go ahead and do this the real way. We're going to go ahead and apply a gradient overlay and a stroke to this button. So I'm going to go layer, layer style, and we'll begin with a gradient overlay. And the gradient overlay, we're going to create a new gradient overlay. So we're going to open up the gradient editor, and down here on the black, I know I want kind of a lightish gray, so I'm going to try like E3, E3, E3. All right, sort of a light gray, nice. And then I definitely want to keep white over here on this side. And then this little center point, I'm going to drag it to a location of 40%, just to give a little bit more influence to the white. Hit OK. And that looks about right. Now we're going to go ahead and apply a stroke. So go ahead and tick on stroke. We're going to set the position to inside. We're going to set the size. Well, we're going to leave the size at 1. What am I thinking? Blend mode is going to remain normal. Opacity 100%. All we need to change is the color. And the color we want is CCC, CCC. There we go. Hit OK. And hit OK again. So there's the basis of our Twitter button. So the next step is going to be dragging in a little blue Twitter bird. Remember, we saved the little guy from earlier. Right, so we can drag him up here to the top and resize him way down so he can fit on our button. So I'm going to zoom in here so I can get a good look at what we're working on, and then size him down, something right about there. That looks good, and move him right over here. There we go, just like that. Looks good. And we now need to apply both a drop shadow and an inner shadow to him just to give him a little bit of depth. We can see if we zoom all the way out, looks pretty good, but I want to make it a little bit more realistic because there's a little bit of a shadow with the real thing. So we're going to go with the inner shadow first. Let's go layer. Well, I'll just say blue Twitter bird so we know what's going on there. We're going to go layer, layer style, and let's say inner shadow. So with the inner shadow here, we're going to use global light ticked on, multiply, great, a color of black, great. We're going to really lighten up the opacity. Let's drop it down to like 15. That looks pretty good. Size of 0. The size is basically the blur on our little inner shadow. And then the distance, 2 actually looks pretty good. Let's see what 1 looks like. I like 1 even more. It's even just a little bit more subtle. I like it. Now we're going to go ahead and add a drop shadow. So we're going to use the drop shadow a little bit unconventionally though. Most of the time you use the drop shadow to add a dark shadow behind or underneath something. We're going to use the drop shadow to add sort of a little bit of a glow or a shine along the bottom of this bird. So we're going to set the blend mode to normal and the color to white. Okay, an opacity of 100 is great. Deselect use global light. Whoa, we just jacked the distance way up. We don't like that. The distance is going to be 1 pixel. And the size is going to be 0. All right, so you can see we're already getting a little bit of this kind of glowing highlight underneath the bird. What I want to do is just change the angle a little bit, something like that, just so we've got it kind of wrapping off of the wing and around the tail. 83 degrees. We could probably just set it to 80. Something like that would be great. So go ahead and hit OK, and let's zoom out, and we can see we've got a nice little bird that looks like he's sort of impressed into the type. Into the button, excuse me. Speaking of type, we're going to go ahead and add the little line of text that says, hey, follow me on Twitter. So I'm going to just drag out some text, and I'm going to say, follow at Tutvid. And you can see some of the type disappears because we don't have quite a big enough text field, but we do have a big enough text field. It's just the text is a little too big. So I'm going to size the type down to about 11 points. There we go. Follow at Tutvid. Great. We're going to set this to bold. And we're going to set the size to just kind of a nice dark gray. So something like maybe 20% on the brightness is good. Maybe actually even a little bit brighter than that. 30%. There we go. That looks good. Hit OK. And again, we're just using a Helvetica font here. And bold, 11 point, and a color of 4C, 4C, 4C. I'm going to grab my move tool and just adjust this just a little bit. There we go, kind of something like that. I can zoom out. And you can see, just like that, we have created this nice little Twitter UI interface that you can use in your graphic projects or your web projects or anything you like, really. So that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you stuck around and watched the whole thing and learned a thing or two. Make sure you go check out the site. That's www.tutvid.com. Thanks for watching, guys.